Hi, this is Dave from Sprizzy. I created this fridge and I thought I would create a video to share with you my print settings. I have spent quite a bit of time trying to get these print settings set up right, and I thought it would be perhaps valuable information for those of you who buy the file. So here you can see this is the Bamboo. I'm in Bamboo Studio, and this is the file that I've been printing all of my fridge parts out of. And you can see sometimes I print more than one. You can see I've got this part here twice. But anyway, let me start here. Well, this is the inner body, and you might at first notice this yellow cube over that. And that is a really cool feature inside of Bamboo Studio. And what it allows for is for you to have different print settings for what's inside this cube than what is outside the cube. And so, for instance, let's say I want a different print settings at the bottom of this than the top, right? I could do a right click over it, add modifier, and see if I make it a cube. See, now it's this, and switch to per object mode, which I'm in, right? And then see, I can select this cube now, and I can move it, right? And move it over, and I can scale it, right? And so whatever's inside that is going to get the print settings here. Like when I have this cube now selected, these print settings only apply to what's inside, right? And if I go back up and I select the full object from up here, that's going to get the settings that are there, right? So this is a different, here, whoop, this is a different set of settings than that. So that's what that is. And then of course you can always just delete it if you don't want that, right? Okay, so for this first plate, this you can see I've got it sideways. There tends to be a little bit more room on Bamboo printers to do it this direction, because when you go this direction, right, some of that room is taken up by this little stripe that gets laid out. And so I've got it this direction. And I've got, for the speed, the first thing I generally do with most things I print is slow it down. I have 5,000 to 7,000 hours on my various printers by now, and they're just not quite as accurate anymore. They're, they get older and a little bit worn, and so I've found that I get better prints if I just slow things down a little bit. So you can see here, got the outer wall down to 100 and the top surface at 100. The outer wall, this is going inside this piece, right? This is going to be typically white, and then this is whatever color you make for the exterior of the fridge. So the outer wall you won't really see because it'll be glued against that. But the inner wall is also an outer wall, right? And I want that to be smooth because that's visible. And like when we hit preview, you can see I like this diagonal line for the base, for the back wall. And I didn't want that diagonal line all around the rim. It looks a bit cleaner to me to have this set to concentric, right? So that we're not creating a little, a little quick diagonal running along this side and running this way. I just chose concentric. That's why I've got the yellow cube there, so that I could have the concentric setting for this top surface and the standard, diagonal for the bottom surface. Then of course I have support enabled and just the tree support. The tree is a better support when you need the support to kind of reach around a corner or something. So you can see it's generating it automatically for these areas inside, right? And these I've found do break off quite easily off of that back surface and don't leave a mark. And then this, right, is holding up those hinges. Okay, and then here, this is pretty basic. Again, it's just slowed down. And I've set it to the outer wall to 100 and top surface to 100. You know, if the inside goes full speed, that's usually okay. If it's a tall, narrow object, that can be a little bit scary if it starts to get things to break off or tip over. But here, it's got plenty of support within the structure. And so full speed on the inside. I just slow down the outer wall because that's what's visible, and that's the part that I want to have a nice finish with minimal like waves or vibrations in it. And also, you know, when a PLA prints faster, it tends to look a little more matte and a little more streaky, and it's a little smoother and shinier, you know, less matte when it's slowed down. And 100 is pretty fast anyway. It's still kind of fast. Okay, and now here, the first thing to notice about this is that it's printed vertically, which is a little counterintuitive because of course it'd be a lot more stable if it were laying down on the bed, but I really like it vertically like this, so that's what gives the best finish on the face, right? This will give the cleanest looking face, and it does create, it needs a lot of support for that, but it just looks so much better. You can see here on the top we get these layer lines, right? And that's not too bad, a little bit on the top. But if we were laying it on its back, then we get those ugly layer lines right here on the face, and we don't want that. This is going to give us our best looking surface. Notice I also use, you see this little icon, I use this variable layer height. And when you first generate it, you know, it's going to give you different variables for every detail. In fact, I should just do it. So if I say, first of all, adaptive, see I get all this. I don't want these layer lines to be, you know, here, because you'll end up seeing that in the print. You'll see these sort of lines streaking across. I want all these lines to be the same width so that the surface looks the same all the way down, right? So what I'll do is do a right click, and see as I drag, it drags. I'm right clicking on my mouse, and on the side here of the screen I'm dragging it down until those are gone, right? You can see where you are too on the model by that yellow line. If I spend more time, then if I hit smooth, well, there was still a bit there. See, I got to drag those down and clean it out. But I've just got it to where there's a little bit of a the lines get a little more close toward the top, right? And I'll drag it down, and then again I'll hit smooth, smooth, smooth until, right, it's only up here that they're narrow. That's what I've done for that door. Okay, here on this next panel, here we'll put that away. These are all fairly standard. I do have a note about this one. Notice that that is not straight up and down. Now I've triple checked this model. That face is perfectly vertical and the base is at a perfect 90 degrees to it. And you would think that if you print it and this is facing straight up, right, going straight up, it would be a nice clean print. But for some reason I keep getting like a line here or a line there, you know, where there's maybe a rounding error or something. I don't know what's happening. I've slowed it down, I've done all kind of things, This part has given me more grief than any other part in the fridge. And what solved everything was putting it like this at 20 degrees. When you read in the file, you'll see it should come in at 20 degrees. That's the ideal angle, I feel like, because I've tested different angles. It's enough that it does not need support. Well, this piece, right? That needs some support. But like this wall, that's only 20 degrees, so it doesn't need support behind it. Right? I tried printing it on its back with a whole bed of support underneath this wall. But that made a really rough and ugly looking wall on the back of this freezer door. But at 20 degrees, you don't need support. This comes out nice and smooth and clean. And this comes out really clean. And we don't get those like lines every now and then. It just came out much nicer. Okay, and you can see I've got support here. Oh, on this axle. The temptation for this axle is to have a brim going all the way around, which works great, except for then you've got to cut that brim off, which is a lot of post-processing, takes a lot of time. And what I've got are these little, I don't know if they're called lily pads or rabbit ears or something. They're, look, if I go back, it's this icon, right? So if I click on it and I do that, right, you can go up underneath and you can click and put it on the end, right? That's this one. And having one on either end is enough to stabilize it. I've printed without these on either end, and then one end always ends up lifting or bending or something, right? And oh, by the way, I have really come to like the Cool Plate Super Tack. I love this new plate, relatively new plate from Bamboo, because I don't need to put any glue on it or anything. If a print is giving me trouble, I will go to the smooth PEI plate. Right? When you buy the machine, it comes with the textured plate, and for a lot of these things, I think they look better smooth than with the texture. So my kind of standard default is the smooth PEI plate. And for some things, for some filaments, the filaments stick well. Right? Like I'm in the habit of using, for instance, gold. With the bar, I'll use Giant Arm Gold Silk PLA, and because I just love that color, it's so much more realistic than like Bamboo's is like a bright, like super bright yellow gold, and it's not so realistic. But Giant Arm has really nice gold color. It's a silk PLA, and it will stick to a PEI plate with really no problem. And so I don't use any like glue on the plate. But for a lot of filaments, especially the matte filaments, they have trouble sticking. And so if I have any trouble, I will use the Bamboo glue. That's what I do when I'm having trouble. Okay. But if I can get away with it, I will use the Cool Plate Super Tack. And it's got kind of a rough surface and things stick to it. And it still leaves a smooth surface when you pull the parts off. So, and for all this, I've been using the Cool Super Tack. This one, Cool Super Tack. Honestly, for this outer wall, if I'm using even Bamboo filament, like they're pink, we print the fridge with a matte pink or a matte yellow, just because the color is so much nicer than the basic. I've had it lift or the first layer doesn't adhere very well to the Super Tack, and so I'll put it on a smooth PEI plate. For the interior, we like the Inland brand. It's the one from Micro Center. You can get it on Amazon though too. Inland White PLA Plus, and that does a great job of sticking to the Super Tack or anything. It's a really, really good filament, and it's nice and bright, and it's strong. It's an excellent filament. Here are the silver parts. I'll print all the silver together. I have this set to concentric for the top surface. I think that's the only change. And then here, I have it set to aligned rectilinear. And let's see, another important, and look, it's sparse infill, aligned rectilinear. The density, this is a very delicate part, so I wanted it fully filled up. I set it to 99 because that will allow for aligned rectilinear. If you put it at 100%, it restricts some of the infill patterns, but it'll be okay with 99. This one actually has quite a few settings changed. Oh, wall generator. Arachne. This is a very important setting actually. You know, it's going to default to classic. What Arachne, I don't know how to pronounce it. Arachne, what that will do is, well, what it will say in the materials is it allows for a variable width in your print line. But what it's really helped me out with is it prevents lines from stringing straight across. So if you want the print head to follow this round arc, right? And sometimes if it's set to standard, you will get some webbing, right? It won't go fully around the wall. Like it won't keep up, and you'll get some webbing going through there. And setting it to Arachne will reduce that considerably. And I don't know if it's meant to, but I found that that's a real positive effect from that. Okay, and ironing, I have it set to ironing. Sometimes ironing will make the surface a little bit more matte, not quite as shiny. But I think even a more matte is preferable here than having the lumps of the layer lines, right? And you can see I've also set it to variable layer height. Anytime you see this icon, right, you'll see variable layer height is set up for it. And for the support, it's enabled, it's at tree default. Either support is going to work okay here. I think tree might be just a touch easier to tear off than the normal. The normal, I like using normal when I can. It's not as good at reaching around things, but it creates a more firm, sort of solid brick of a bed. And tree is a little easier to peel off in this case. Okay, it's slowed down. Here I've used slowed down by height. Instead of messing with, okay, slow down this and this and this and this, what I've done here is just slow everything down. Right? And you can see pretty slow to 70 millimeters per second. And I've reduced the acceleration by a zero, just to get everything sort of toned down to get the cleanest looking shape out of it. Right? So you can see those settings. Yeah, that was a fussy part. But you can see how that prints now. Right? It's got an arc in it so that it fits against that front of the door. Right? And then after peeling off all this support, I usually scrape it with a razor blade to get those bottom faces smooth so that they're ready to get glued up against the fridge door. These doors, same thing. I've just got two of them here, but this is the interior door. And you can see it generates quite a bit of support, but it's worth it because then you'll get a nice, smooth, clean surface here. It's worth it, I have found. You can see here, these are just the badges. I'll print a whole batch at once because I like to print them in that gold color. And so you don't want to do one for every time you print a fridge. Okay, here is an option. If you want the exterior and the interior to be the same color, perhaps white, you want the whole fridge to be white, there's not really a reason then to print a separate outer shell and inner shell, right? Why print it twice when you can just do it once, right? And save the material for the walls in between. So there's an optional part, it's called fused optional, in case you just want it all to be the same color. That's what that is. It's got the same settings as this one. And it does have a little bit of, support. Those hinges are supported by tiny little support things there. And I'll use some really thin needle nose pliers to dig those out afterwards. They come out pretty easy. And you can see here, I've got support here. This is the standard support, right? Not the tree, standard, which works out better here because it's not trying to reach around anything. And, you know, I don't need a big, huge round thing coming, you know, crashing in here, so I have to move it away. This works out better for support here. These are the clear parts of the fridge. I'm printing these on an A1. I like doing it on the A1 because it's so much easier to swap out the head. And I like to use a 0.6 diameter, right? When you buy a machine, it'll typically come with a 0.4 millimeter diameter nozzle. And for clear parts, you benefit by a wider head, and it ends up looking just a little more clear, right? Because the things that make it less clear, right, are where the lines kind of come together. So the bigger the line itself can be, the more clarity your whole part will have. So I printed at 0.6 and I do it on the A1. And when I'm using this PET, I use the PETG translucent because Bambu doesn't have a filament in PLA that's just clear. They all have some tint, some colored tint to them. And the PETG has the perfectly clear. And it's really nice. I really like their PETG, and it's a good price, right? It's the same price as the PLA. So I use that, and when I use the PETG, I'm always certain to use the Bambu glue, right, in that green container, because otherwise it sticks really hard to the plate. It's really hard to get PETG off of a smooth plate. You really want to use the glue. The glue really has two functions, right? When using the word glue, like I had always assumed that meant it will help it to stick to the plate, but it actually does just the opposite. It helps it to release. So the glue has two purposes. One is to make a rougher surface that the melted plastic coming out of the nozzle will stick to, right? Without glue, sometimes it'll slide over the plate, it won't adhere. And the glue helps it stick, or helps it has a rougher, tackier surface that is going to sort of draw the PLA onto it, and it's less likely to sort of slide off, right? But then when your print is finished, it's much easier to get it off of the plate when you've got that layer of glue in between, right? But it does add a little bit more work, because afterwards you want to like wash off that glue off your plate and off your part. I always do it after every time I make a print, so I have a nice clean surface to start again. So okay, for these clear parts, notice here I have it set to global. You can, any of these settings, right, can be set for global or per object. Here on global, since these were, I created a special file just for this print session, right, that I'm going to do on the Bambu A1. And so I set a global setting, aligned rectilinear, and I've rotated it instead of 45 degrees, it's at 90, so that we get the print at right angles. I just felt like that looked a little nicer here. You can see all these lines are at, they're straight sideways. Here, if I go here to line type, see those are all at right angles. And I think I have the top, well, this is all set to aligned rectilinear. And yeah, and support, I've just enabled that, right? Whenever it's red, you know, there's a setting there that you've changed from default. Now per object, I have different settings per object. So this, okay, here. Now notice that these are at angles, right? Rather than straight across. I was getting some of the same situation as with the freezer door, where I was getting these lines through it. And it works a little better on an angle. Not only that, but when the boundary, or I should say the seam, I want it to go on this corner so that when, you know, it's going to come, the head is going to, or nozzle, is going to rotate here in a counterclockwise way. And you want the seam to be right at the end here so that when it starts and, you know, begins, it has this little space to kind of get going, right? And so you'll notice here it gets going this way. Because let's say instead the seam was here. You don't want it to come off of a seam and go this way, because you'll get a kind of a rough area here on the right where you want to see through it. It's better to have the roughness on the end, right? So I have the seam here instead of here, just so that where it's rough, which it will be right after the seam. And believe me, I've played with these seams forever. There's all kinds of settings that you can use for seams. Scarf. When you're printing a cylindrical type object and you need a seam somewhere, it's really hard to hide that seam. And scarf is an attempt to spread out or distribute that seam over a wider space. And for opaque objects that could be useful. Not so much for clear. You'll still see the scarf. They're worth experimenting with, right? And you can always look up the documentation around scarf. Anyway, those are the settings I have found to be useful. Again here, I could have used standard support, but I just found that the tree support was easier to get ripped off of the bottom of this. I hope you'll enjoy printing the fridge, and take care.